Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for Envisioning Equity. We have a wonderful lineup of presenters and panelists that will be discussing criminal justice through addressing incarceration and recidivism and the prison entrepreneurship program. I have a few reminders for us today as we start our session. First, we will be recording this session so that those who couldn't be with us today can go back and watch the recording. Also, if you have any questions throughout the event, you'll see a Q&A button on the bottom of the webinar, and so you can put any questions there and they will be answered towards the end of our time together. Before we get started, we want to go over some brief definitions so that everyone is on the same page throughout our conversation. A lot of the times these words are used interchangeably, but they do have distinct definitions. We wanted to clarify those before our conversation gets started. So first we have inequality, which is defined as unequal access to opportunities. And next we have equality, which is defined as evenly distributed tools and assistance. Then we have equity, which is the custom tools that identify and address inequality. And last, we have justice, which is fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So those were scrolling as we were getting ready to start today, but wanted to make sure and clarify those to keep in mind as we continue together today. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Sarah Dye, who will be one of our presenters today. Sarah Dye's PhD is a researcher and project manager at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, where she currently leads the organization's carceral systems projects. Her work explores the relationships between rhetoric and writing, individual and collective political and religious beliefs, values and identities, and social policies, systems, and injustices. She studies these intersections through qualitative research, rhetorical analysis, and interdisciplinary collaborations. Dr. Dye, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I wish that we could all be together in person, but I'm so thankful that in this virtual presentation format, we can have so many more people. So I am going to provide some context for today's conversation. So I'm going to be discussing briefly an overview of the state of incarceration, reentry, and recidivism in the US. And so what we're going to do here is that I'm going to briefly introduce kind of my work here at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, and then really, though, provide the context for the rest of our conversation about reentry and recidivism. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of incarceration in the US to give us some context for that, and then talk about the current state of reentry and recidivism. And then I'll introduce Brian Kelly, who will share a presentation prior to our panel discussion. So, but before I begin, I want to briefly note that there are 3 people on my team, my criminal justice team here at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty: Tasha Roberts, Elijah Tanner, and Marcus Franklin. And while they're not presenting with me, their work is integral to everything I do, including this presentation, and I'm really grateful for them. Additionally, you'll see a lot of graphics and throughout the PowerPoint from the Prison Policy Initiative. And I want to highly recommend them as a source, and also just express gratitude for the incredible work they do in data visualization. Finally, we're going to be moving so quickly, and I hope that if you have any questions about wanting to know more about something, wanting to know a source, I have a references slide, but we'll be moving so quickly that I want you to let you know, please reach out and ask questions. My contact information will be on a slide later in the presentation. So let's get started. Here at the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, or we abbreviate it BCHIP, we work on research, policy, and practice toward the end of cultivating scalable solutions to end hunger. And hunger intersects with poverty and all of its other intersecting social issues, one of which is incarceration. We know that formerly incarcerated persons and their families are significantly more likely to be food insecure, that is, to lack stable, consistent access to adequate or enough food. And so we are working at the intersection of food insecurity and incarceration on the research front. And there's some good research out there, but there isn't a lot. And so we're stepping into that research policy and practice gap at the intersection of food insecurity and incarceration. And one of the things that we're doing in that is that we have come alongside the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, or PEP, as a research and evaluation partner. And so Brian, the CEO of PEP, will be sharing more later, and they work at the space of kind of recidivism and reentry. So I'm providing the kind of basic overview context for Brian's presentation and then for our panel discussion later. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to say is that our carceral system, or criminal justice system, and I'll use those terms interchangeably, our carceral system in the US is incredibly complicated. So a couple of examples. And let me say too, it might feel over the course of the next 10 or 15 minutes like you're drinking from a fire hose. And I'm just going to be able to just scratch the surface because of the complexities, but I want to give a sense because I think it is important context for what's to come. So our system's complexities in part are due to the fact that we have both public and private prisons. We have federal and state prisons, and those operate differently on different scales, and things vary a lot from state to state. We also have prisons and jails, and a lot of times those terms are used interchangeably, but they're actually not the same. So jails are primarily full of people who are still awaiting trial. So they haven't gone to trial, they're being held, and whether they don't have bail or they couldn't post bail, or they're being held awaiting trial, whereas prisons are where people are serving their sentences. So that's a distinction. And then our adult prison system is also divided into men's facilities and women's facilities. And then we also have detention centers divided into three kinds in this country. We have juvenile detention centers, immigration detention centers, and involuntary psychiatric commitment centers. So when we say the criminal justice system, we're actually talking about this really complex web of systems and structures that have some through lines at the federal level, but then that also vary a lot state to state and locale to locale. So that's the first thing. Let's talk then a little bit about incarceration rates. So as you can see from this pretty alarming chart, you can see there that the US incarcerates 665 people per 100,000 people. Here in the state of Texas, it's far more than that, 840. And you can see that compared to founding NATO countries, the closest is the UK with 129 people per 100,000. In fact, the countries closest to the US in terms of incarceration rate are El Salvador, Rwanda, Brazil, and Russia. But even if most US states were their own countries, they would have incarceration rates that outpace almost all other countries. So we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world fairly significantly. And before we go to talk about some of those specific statistics, I want to define two kind of terms. We talk sometimes about the correctional population and then other times about the incarcerated population. So the correctional population includes people who are incarcerated, people who are on probation and parole. So correctional is made up of supervision, probation and parole, and incarceration, whereas the incarcerated population are those that are currently behind bars, right? They're in a jail, they're in a prison, they're in a detention center. So in the US, our total adult correctional population, incarcerated, probation, and parole, is about 6.3 million people, which is just under the population of the state of Tennessee as a total in total. So our adult incarcerated population, the number of people behind bars, is about 2.1 million. In Texas, our adult correctional population is about 722,000 people, which is larger than the city of El Paso. And then our incarcerated population is about the size of Lubbock at about 250,000 people. So we're talking about just enormous numbers of people that are incarcerated in the US. Another feature of the US carceral system is racial disparities. So as you can see here, for every 100,000 Black men in America, 2,300 are incarcerated compared to about 400 white men per 100,000 white men. You can also see that racial disparity carry over some into the women's prison population. So racial disparity is another key feature of our carceral system. So you can see from this slide what the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of a US resident born in 2001 is based on sex and race and ethnicity. So if you're a man in America, you have a 1 in 9 chance. But if you're a Black man in America, you have a 1 in 3 chance. I, as a white woman, have a 1 in 111 chance, whereas a Latinx woman has a 1 in 45 chance, or a Black woman a 1 in 18 chance. So you can see here that this is just enormous numbers of people that we're talking about. And so that's just the highest level overview of the state of incarceration in the US. So let's look now at kind of the state of recidivism and reentry. So let me define those real quick. Reentry is what we mean usually when we talk about someone leaving incarceration and re-entering kind of society writ large. So when someone's sentence is up or they've gotten parole or when they leave, that is reentry. Recidivism is kind of defined as the propensity to return to criminal behavior or to reoffend. So the recidivism rate is the rate at which formerly incarcerated people reoffend and then are back in the criminal justice system and sometimes re-imprisoned, as we'll discuss in a second. So about 600,000 people are released from state and federal prison each year. On average, more than 2/3 of released formerly incarcerated persons in America are rearrested within 5 years, and almost half return to prison within 5 years. So there is an enormous kind of the percentage of people that return to prison or have further interaction with the criminal justice system after reentry is substantial. So formerly incarcerated persons in the US face up to 44,000 collateral consequences of their incarceration following their release. Collateral consequences are those consequences of a crime or of having served time that are not directly related to the sentence. So a collateral consequence is a consequence that occurs beyond those consequences that were kind of assigned to you by court, your prison sentence, anything else that you have required. So collateral consequences impact, for example, housing and access to housing, employment, voting and voting restrictions. They can also impact food insecurity and SNAP access. And so I'm going to give a specific kind of example of what this looks like in practice in a minute. But for now, just kind of think about this number of people, 600,000 people being released every year with those odds, the odds of about 2/3 of them are going to get rearrested. Probably about half will return to prison within 5 years, because at the point of reentry, there are all of these collateral consequences and barriers to reentry that can then set the scene for recidivation. And so I think that, having this kind of overview is really, really important. One thing that we often, I think, neglect to think about too, though, is that mass incarceration, or the number of people that are incarcerated in this country, doesn't just impact the people who are incarcerated. We're also talking about the people who are formerly incarcerated and then their family, people who have criminal records. So as you can see here, if you trace it out to the number of people who have an immediate family member who's ever been to prison or jail, it's about 113 million American adults, which is just under half of the American adult population. So when we talk about the challenges to reentry, and when we talk about recidivism, and when we talk about collateral consequences, we have to remember that those factors, those barriers, those consequences aren't just impacting, the 2-ish million people who are incarcerated or the 6-ish million people who are under supervision. We're talking all the way down to their family, their friends, their communities, and that is just an enormous percentage of the American population. Here in McLennan County, as of March 31st of this year, there were about 1,600 individuals on felony probation and about 700 individuals on misdemeanor probation. And in McLennan County, as of August of last year, there were about 1,600 individuals on parole in McLennan County. And so this is also impacting our community, right, at rates that are pretty similar to those across the country. And so for every one of these people on probation or parole, we also have people who are currently in local jails, and then there are McLennan County residents who are serving prison sentences, and then there are all of their family and friends. This is happening in our community too. So before I turn it over to Brian, I just want to ask you to kind of do a little imaginative exercise with me to help get a picture of what this actually looks like in practice, in context. And so let's imagine, if you will, that you have a felony drug conviction. You served time for that conviction, and now you have gotten out. Part of why you started using drugs was that a lot of people in your immediate community were using them, and to avoid the possibility that you would kind of fall back into that, you decide to move. So that you're kind of fresh start, new place, new people, but you've lost the support system that entails. And now let's say you've had a kid since you got out and you're struggling to get a job because one of the collateral consequences of incarceration is that you have employment is much harder to find. People can not hire you because you have a criminal record. And so you've struggled to get a job, and you're a recipient of SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is helping to feed you and your kid as you've kind of struggled economically. So let's say you make a new friend in your new community, and that friend says, hey, you know, I've got a guy who's leaving my crew, and I'd love to have you come and be an air conditioning tech. That's what I do for my business. I'd really like to help you get back on your feet. I'll train you and you can come work for me. But then you find out that in the state of Texas, with a felony conviction, you can't get an air conditioned tech licensure. That's another collateral consequence. Some kinds of licensures you can't get anymore. So that job opportunity doesn't pan out. But you get another interview. You're really excited. You don't often get a lot of interviews. So to go to that interview, you, in the process of doing it, you miss a check-in with your parole officer. And so you miss it. It's happened before and it's been okay. You forgot to call, you went to the interview, you find out later you didn't get the job. So you're still really struggling financially. Well, another thing is when people are on parole and probation, they have to pay fees. And so let's say that because you didn't get the job, you don't have any money. And so you can't pay your parole fees that month. Well, at that point, if that then becomes, you have now violated the terms and conditions of your parole. And in the state of Texas, that means that you can lose SNAP for up to 2 years for a parole violation. And so this example, I think, just shows how cyclical these collateral consequences can be at the point of reentry. It's a hypothetical situation, and it's just one of many possible things that can happen upon reentry. But that is often the kind of web of collateral consequences that people get stuck in. And that's what we're going to talk about today is reentry and recidivism and what folks at the Prison Entrepreneurship Program are doing about it. And then we're going to think and talk in our panel discussion about what we can be thinking about on the local level. And hopefully it'll spark thought for you and your communities too, if you're not local. So that is the bulk of what I am going to share with you. Here's my contact information. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know that was so much information so quickly. But now I want to turn it over to Brian Kelly to talk about what the Prison Entrepreneurship Program is doing at this reentry point and the effect that that's had on recidivism and in the locations that they work in Dallas and Houston. And so let me introduce Brian. Brian Kelly serves as the CEO of the Prison Entrepreneurship Program, an innovative social enterprise that unites business executives and inmates through entrepreneurial passion and servant leadership to transform lives, restore families, and rebuild communities. He believes that all people, including felons, are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Brian has a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from Sam Houston State University and is going to be sharing more about himself in his presentation. Brian, so glad you're here. Good to see you as always. Can't wait to hear from you.
Dr. Dye, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, but it's a joy and an honor to work with you and your team and thinking about this very important issue in the country. Prison Entrepreneurship Program has been smack dab in the middle of that for some number of years. And I'd like to share with you some of our experiences, but also some of my experiences. So first of all, allow me to share my screen. I want to maybe make a little bit of a backdrop. I am the CEO of the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. Have been in that role for about 4 years. I've been on staff for 8. I was introduced to the program in 2007. We are an innovative social enterprise that uses the vehicle of entrepreneurship to foster change and transformation in our inmate population in Texas. We've had some tremendous outcomes in doing that. We've got an 18-year history that has showed an average recidivism rate of 8% compared to what Dr. Dye shared with you earlier. And so, I've been knee deep in this myself for quite some time. And it's also a personal thing. I was not always just CEO or a staff member of Prison Entrepreneurship Program. I'm also a graduate. And so I want to take you back to maybe to a scene in early 1992. I stood in a courtroom. I felt the judgmental eyes upon me in a very claustrophobic courtroom. I dared not even breathe for fear that there would be more attention drawn to me. And I stood there quiet, not breathing. Finally, the judge looked at me and he looked at me over his glasses and he said, "Mr. Kelly, a jury of your peers has found you guilty of the crime of murder and has sentenced you to life in a state penitentiary. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Folks, I stood there trembling. What could I say? Could I make a plea, a background and say, "Hey, look, I came from a single parent home, an absentee father, I've never known him, that I had an overwhelmed single mom who was using working class moxie to try to put food on the table and struggling most of the time, that we knew food insecurity, that housing insecurity, that I come from a zip code that almost predicts economic struggle, that I was surrounded by a family of alcoholic construction workers who were not great role models, who never gave me a vision of what a successful life was going to look like. That I tried several outlets, that I tried geographical changes, that I've tried other career opportunities. I met nothing but resistance. The one thing that I found that I was good at, it was addiction and alcoholism. And so I just dove in that. I knew there was no future, but it was all I had. It was all I was good at. And I devolved to the place that in a horrible moment, I took the life of a man in a dope deal that went horribly wrong. He was actually a friend of mine, and my life was just in such a supreme, era of desperation. It was almost a macabre plea to get me out, and it did. I was given a life sentence for murder, remanded to the prison system, where I would become a prisoner for an undetermined length. I didn't know what that would look like. And the picture that you're looking at was actually not quite 2 years into my incarceration. You can almost see, I was looking at this picture earlier, there's hope there. And what had just happened is I just had an encounter with God. When I came to prison, I realized I'm part of the problem. I'm a cancer on the face of society. I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be something else. I wanted to be part of the solution. I just didn't know how. And so I dove into new opportunities in prison and had an encounter with God. I went back to school. I became a peer educator. I earned a degree. I began to help the men around me, not knowing if I would ever get out of prison, but I wanted to invest my life into something that was worthwhile. And for the very first time, I saw where there was a little niche that I could dive into, and that was just helping the inmate population around me. And so, Later on, I would be introduced to the prison entrepreneurship program. I was a peer educator at that time. I got to help men really put together a new plan for their life. I was helping them with addiction, character issues, working with the inmate staff and the outside staff with prison entrepreneurship. And it was the best application of my life to that point. And I thought, this is it. This is a way that I can make a mark going forward. This is what I want to continue to do, even if I never get out of prison. But you know what? In the fullness of time, I came up for parole my 13th time. I just cleared the 20-year mark. The parole commissioner told me that the conversation had completely changed, that they were going to give me a shot at parole on the outside. At the end, he asked me, do you have any questions? And I said, yes, sir, I've got one. Will you give me parole next year? And he stared at me and he said, son, are you asking me to stay in prison for another year, having done 20? And I said, well, yeah. Yes, sir, I guess I am. And he said, why would you do that? And I said, I want to go through the prison entrepreneurship program as a participant and develop a business plan that I've got and a vision for my life. But the only way I can do that is if you give me a hard release date for next year, because I need to be able to be housed on a pre-release facility. And he just stared at me for the longest time without blinking. I think he was just amazed. He gave me exactly what I asked for. I bargained for an extra year in prison so that I would be able to go through the program that I knew would help change my life, that would empower me to do something different, something amazing, that would introduce a new family of volunteers that would help me think through issues. The only way I'd do it was make that supreme sacrifice. And I did. When I got out, I went to their transitional house in Dallas in 2014 after doing 22 years in prison. And I was offered a job about 30 days out. I went through case management for a few years, property management. I helped teach some of the classes on the inside. I was just giving back. I switched over to the developmental side. And in the fullness of time, my predecessor, the previous CEO, offered me a role as his successor, as the next CEO. And I was honored, didn't feel qualified, but at the same time, I love motivating and empowering men to follow the same path that I've done, a path to success, a path to triumphant life. And so let me tell you a little bit about our program, because it has greatly impacted me. It has greatly impacted thousands of other guys coming out of prison who want to turn their life around. We stand on three major pillars in our program. And number one is character. And so many people think it's job skills that we need to teach these guys, but I'll tell you what, many men go to prison with great job skills, but nobody goes to prison with great character. So we've got to teach guys just like me how to make better decisions, how to live a life of faith, how to think through issues that would otherwise confound them. And so we start out by building the foundation of character for which we can build something great upon. We've got to have that foundation. We instill things like integrity, accountability, wise stewardship, excellence, execution, and things that they were going to need to succeed when they get out. And it works well on the inside too. Another pillar is community. Just like in my case, I was never surrounded with a successful community. It takes somebody of success to teach somebody what that's going to look like. And so I'd never been modeled that. And so we bring in successful businessmen, women into prison. We run Shark Tanks, mock interviews and workshops and things like that. So our men get to interact with professionals and learn to interact and communicate on a professional level. They get new ideas, new visions, and they're surrounded by people who will help them connect the dots. Most of our men inside of prison, in the day rooms all over the state, all over the country, have great creative ideas of what they want to do when they get out, but I call those things delusional solutions, because they really have no idea how to execute those ideas and make them plans. And so as soon as they get out, they get hit in the mouth with reality and they divert back to exactly what they know, their past behaviors. We introduce a new community that helps them think through what a different life would look like. And the last pillar I want to bring up is capital. And by that, I do not mean that we are just throwing money at these guys. That is not going to solve any problem. But what we do help them do is think of ways to increase their earning potential post-release. And for our entrepreneurs, we've actually started a second chance lending arm called Entree Capital. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but they have struggled with obtaining capital post-release. And so for our entrepreneurs, we want them to not have that barrier to entry in entrepreneurship post-release. But so just the increased earning potential, if you can earn enough to live a prosperous and rewarding life, a life according to purpose, you're probably not going to fall back into things that you've done before that led to prison. And so those three pillars, character, community, and capital, make a huge difference. But let me dive down maybe a little bit more into the minutia of this. Is we take men who have great creative ideas and help them think through that. We give them a new tool belt, a new way to think about their problem that they've largely created for themselves, but they've also encountered some barriers that society has put around them as well. And we help them put together a solid business plan. We help them create, build, and deliver a business pitch and defend that pitch. It's amazing to me when men start our program, they can't even really look at me in the eyes and shake my hand because they're so broken and spilled out, ashamed of who they are. And just a few short months later, that same guy will stand in a room, deliver a 10-minute business pitch to a room of volunteers and his peers. There might be 100, 150 people in the room. He will deliver his product or service offering, his industry, competitors, differentiation, a 3-year performa, a marketing plan. He might talk about philanthropy. My gosh, Dr. Dye, he might use your name right in the middle of the pitch, even though he just met you. He's learned to work the room with confidence and competence, and it is amazing to see that transformation in just a few short months. You may know this already, but our prisons are some of the most racially stratified areas of our community anywhere. You are taught, you are conditioned to hate people of other races. In prisons, they sit in benches according to your race, and there's constantly attention. There's constantly fighting amongst our races. And so in our program, that does not happen. We teach the races how to work together, how to love each other. It's amazing to see how many of them embrace and cry over each other when they're leaving prison. They're praying over them. You see, we celebrate major milestones, major victories in their lives. They come together and they come together as a family, regardless of race, regardless of background, regardless of criminal episodes in their past. It's amazing to see how that family just develops. So what's the outcomes? What happens when we do that on the inside? And it takes both an inside component and an outside component. Well, we've had 600 businesses started by ex-felons in our 18-year history, some of which are pretty substantial, had revenues or sales well over $1 million. This is a picture of Steve. Steve was an ex-gang leader, sold drugs, led a lot of violent acts in his crews in the past, and now he's running a trucking crew. He currently had 5 trucks, this hotshot dually, but he also had some tractor trailers. And he has just taken on a persona of a solid character guy with grit, moxie, resilience, and has become a small business owner, creating jobs for men just like him. It's amazing. Going back to the providing capital to our would-be entrepreneurs, we have built the Entree Capital, our second chance lending arm. We're a micro lender, and we also showcase our second chance entrepreneurs once a year in a showcase event in either Dallas or Houston. This is a winner of our first event. Ruben Mauricio built a diesel services out in West Texas around the oil fields. He just wowed the crowd that night. Won $100,000 that he was going to build a shop with. It was right at the beginning of COVID. He ended up increasing his fleet, buying 2 trucks. Part of that problem was he went to his bank that he had already done millions of dollars worth of business with, and they would not loan him the money to get 2 new trucks. So he took the money that he won that night and got 2 trucks and has increased in his fleet. He's looking at doing $3.9 million this year as an ex-felon who had never had a job previous to prison. And so it's just amazing, this transformation stories that are coming out of prison entrepreneurship program. This is a very quick synopsis of what we do. And it's just an overview, 30,000 foot view. Everything below the barbed wire is what we do inside a prison. Everything above is what we do post-release. We're an inside-out model. It takes both. We start on the left-hand side with Leadership Academy, and that's the character assessment and development. We've got to build that foundation. The business planning competition is where we instill business basics, business acumen, where we introduce successful businessmen and women who come in and have those Shark Tank events, workshops, and work together. And then the servant leader portion is when past graduation, when our guys have the skill sets now, it's time to give back to the guys coming behind them. And so they learn that that give and take, that give back, that learn to get outside of self and help others. Once we get out, we have a case management team that helps with the reentry support. There is just a labyrinth of barriers to reentry once the guys get out, and our case management team that we call Life Caddies walks along with them and shows them the lay of the land, helps them navigate that. We have a continuing education program on the right-hand side called eSchool. That's life skills, and make sure that they have that stability underneath them with technology, banking, financial literacy, relationships, things like that. And then for those guys who really want to launch their business, we have a second level of curriculum, eSchool, that's geared towards small business startup, help them fill in any gaps in their business plan. We have Entree Capital, and then we have a pipeline that ends in our showcase event, our Barbed Wire to Business Accelerator Pitch event at the end of the year. And now we're creating what we're calling PEP Colliders. So it's going to be a post-release collision between our volunteers, our mentors, our business advisors with our participants so that they're getting everything they need to launch their dream. Let's talk about some other statistics. I mentioned that our recidivism rate over our 18-year history is at 8%. You can see on the left-hand side, the orange line at the bottom is our recidivism rate by year cohort compared to the yellow line up above, which is the state prison population in general. You can see at any given time, we're about a third of what they are. And we've had the pushback over the years of people saying, you know, you're picking the cream of the crop, but that's really not the case. The green line up above is a control group of people that we've selected to our program, but for administrative reasons, we're never sent to the program to go through it. And you can see that their recidivism rate hovers around the state average. And so it's the program that's making the difference. On the social inclusion part on the right-hand side of the screen, you may know this, but in Texas prisons, it's almost equally distributed inside the prisons of Black, brown, and white, about a third each in the population. Obviously, our African-American friends are disproportionately represented in that. But you can also see of those who were invited to PEP, responded, and were accepted to PEP, we're almost a mirror image of who's in prison. Same thing goes for educational level, age, all those things. We are a cross-section of who's in prison. So let's talk about one of the things we're here to talk about, economic mobility and how that leads to a stable housing and a stable life. We chart all kinds of data. We are looking at average to first job. We're looking at first job wage and what that looks like at intervals of 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, year, 2, 3 years. You can see that our guys are averaging almost $13 an hour first job, usually on an average of 22 days. But at the 3-year mark, they're typically making about $50,000 a year. We're starting to get into that livable wage zone. And that translates into stable housing, which is on the right-hand side. When our guys get out of prison, the first bar on the left-hand side under housing shows that they're completely dependent upon transitional housing, family members, and things like that. But at the 3-year mark, when all of the 2/3 of the population across the country are going back into prison, 42% of our guys own their own home. The next two boxes are renting a home, renting an apartment. So over 90% of our graduates at the 3-year mark post-release, because of their increased earning potential, have stable housing and also no longer have food insecurity. We have been third-party verified. Baylor, as a matter of fact, has done a pretty extensive evaluation showing that we've greatly outperformed 8 other programs in the state. That's a somewhat dated study that showed our 7% recidivism at the time. American Enterprise Institute has taken a look at us. We had the Initiative for Competitive Intercity, a think tank by Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter did an evaluation of the economic impacts that prison entrepreneurship program is making on the state of Texas, and found there was an 800% ROI on the dollars that come into PEP, but we're making a $122 million impact on the state. Now, this is from, at the time, an organization that had about a $2.7 million budget at the time, $122 million impact in decreased incarceration costs, increase of capital into the program. And so just some amazing statistics, I think. I've got a few stories. I'm just going to let these pictures stand for where I'm running out of time, but just taking somebody from a gun carrying drug dealer into a guy with an accounting degree, business owner, community builder. James was homeless, living on the streets of Houston for a couple of years, and is now a real producer. He's going back to school. He's been a manager at a DHL franchise. He's starting his own HVAC business, re-engaged with his family. Benjamin was a self-proclaimed derelict, and he's now a father, a manager at a home builder, a husband. Just amazing stories of transformation. It's been an amazing journey. I love what I do. I love being surrounded by all these examples of transformation. People in prison desperately want to turn their lives around. They just don't know how. It takes some new training. It takes a new community and gives them equal opportunity. We think of these guys as second chance citizens. It's not a second chance. For our guys, it's a legitimate first chance with real opportunities. And so let me just stop there. I want to toss this back over to you, Dr. Dye, and maybe open the conversation up a little bit. That's a little bit about PP. Happy to talk more as needed.
Thank you so much, Brian. As always, good to hear from you. So I'm really excited to move into a kind of panel discussion portion. You know, we've got this context of what incarceration and reentry and recidivism are like in this country, the incredible barriers largely due to those collateral consequences, some of the systemic problems that people face when they come out. And then we've also seen with PEP, you know, one of many, but one intervention here in our state that has had these, as Brian said, just really remarkable kind of results in its history. And so now we're gonna turn to talking about this with all of that context and bring in some local leaders that I'm really excited for everyone to hear from. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and as I introduce them, they'll join, and then we'll get right into some question and some dialogue. And again, please feel free to submit questions if you have them, and we'll work those into as time allows. So I'd love to introduce to you Jason Ramos, who is Director of Impact Waco at Antioch Community Church. Impact Waco includes Stars Book Clubs, Addiction Recovery Ministry, Unbound, Jail Ministry, Sports Ministry, and community outreach. For years, he has mentored students in Waco ISD and coached hundreds of kids through Waco Southern Little League, where he also serves as president. He's currently a pastor with the McLennan County Jail, and in the past led a residential addiction recovery home for almost 10 years. Jason has a long history of walking with individuals out of a life of addiction and criminal conduct and into a life of freedom and purpose. He himself has been free from a life of crime and drug addiction for 15 years. And has since committed himself, along with his family, to help others in the Waco community experience a life of freedom and hope. He currently serves on various boards and commissions in the Waco community, including but not limited to the City of Waco Plan Commission, the Greater Waco Sports Commission, Christian Women's Job Corps, the Waco Police Academy Advisory Committee, and Waco Southern Little League, among others. Jason is committed to helping Waco be a great place to live and raise a family. Jason loves to live on mission and advance the kingdom of God here in Waco and around the world. Jason is married to Monica, who is a nurse at Providence Hospital. They have 5 kids and 2 granddaughters. And Jason, we're really glad that you're here. Tiffany Gallegos Whitley is also joining us. She is the Director of Workforce Initiatives at Prosper Waco. She's called Waco home for the past 12 years. She's a 2-time Baylor University graduate, receiving a bachelor's degree in international studies and a master of social work degree. In her role as Director of Workforce Initiatives, Tiffany oversees workforce projects that bring together key stakeholders to collaborate and continue building equitable training and career pathways for all McLennan County residents. Tiffany, welcome. Glad you're here. And finally, we have Assistant Chief Mark Norcross, who joined the Waco Police Department in 1983. He's worked in patrol and investigations as both a grade 1 and as a supervisor. He's been a supervisor since 1993 and has managed all sections of the department during that time, including the CID, DEU, Management Services, and SWAT. He currently serves as the Assistant Chief over Support Services Command. Assistant Chief Norcross was awarded a master's degree from Tarleton. He has a Master's Peace Officer certificate and an instructor certification from TCOLE. He has been awarded 2 Medal of Valor awards, a life-saving award, a police commendation, and a meritorious unit award. Assistant Chief Norcross grew up in the Dallas Metroplex, graduating from DeSoto High School. Assistant Chief Norcross, we're so glad you're here. I hope that we can, just dive right in and have really great conversation. We have a lot of great questions. So we'll go ahead and kick it off. And I'm going to ask first that you all could share, if you would, a story or experience that changed the way you saw or experienced or thought about life as a formerly incarcerated person. So Jason, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Yeah. So again, I'm thankful to be able to be here with y'all and for all of those watching, and we'll be watching after this is we're done for today. But a story or experience. Growing up, I witnessed a lot of people that went to prison and got out of prison, whether it was family or neighbors. It was all in the community. And one thing I did start to see over and over again was people a lot of people I knew when they got out of prison, the first thing they did was they had this huge party and they went back to doing some of the same things that got them into prison in the first place right away. And it was a lot of it was due to the relationships that they had. And so they came out with good intentions, but because of the network relationships they got into or they had, it led them back into prison. And so as myself, years later, would find myself going in and out of jail. And then I found myself when I had found freedom and got sent away for a little while. When I came home, I knew that a big piece of my journey and of my process when I got out was going to be the relationship piece. And so I found a church that I had got introduced to before I got locked up and went away. And when I came home, I had it in my heart to say, God, I want to be around the people that are following you, whether they look like me or whether they don't. I'm down for this new start, and that's where I want to go. And so I found a relationship or a network of people that really wanted to walk with me, invest in me, and didn't see me as a project, but legitimately came alongside me and wanted to live life with me. And so at the same time, I had a lot of my relationships, whether it was families, friends, they were all still in the same lifestyle. And so I came to a place where I was like, I knew that I wanted to still love them, be around them, but I knew that I couldn't engulf myself into it, even though they were my closest relationships, because I wanted to make it. And so that helped me see, one, that not only the impact that it made in my life and on the journey, then started to see how can I help create that or offer that for other people that are coming out of prison, and saw the impact that it was making in individuals' life that decided to say, I'm willing to try that and come around a new network of people that have my best interests and live life with me.
And I'll piggyback just because I've actually known Jason for quite a few years in the community. We've run in the same reentry reintegration circles. And I think I did not, and I had the privilege to really not have to think about, all of the barriers that formerly incarcerated folks faced until I started working with them a while back in a previous role doing direct service with folks who were both on probation, parole, but then those who had also been recently released from prison. And Brian, to go back to what you were saying, we were very job skills specific organization, and you find all of those barriers wrap up, particularly those that have been behind bars for a while, getting an ID that they need to even apply for a job. a job that would be a fit based on their background, licensing restrictions. I mean, there were a lot of things that were coming up against, you know, as I was working in a more case management perspective. And then in addition to that, you know, what Jason was talking about as community is, you know, it's great to teach a job skills class, but there's no sense of that community that, you know, we were really providing, or even just the relational support piece, whether it be from a peer, someone who's with lived experience, or just people who are willing to walk alongside you. And so I think that was the real eye-opening experience to me, that it's not just about skills training and that's just going to automatically lead to long-term behavior change. It really does take a holistic approach and a collaborative approach as well. It's not just one organization solving and giving this silver bullet solution. I found that particularly working with these folks, that collaboration is key, as well as humility. I think for those of us who have not lived through that experience, when we are working with folks who are formerly incarcerated or in the justice system, that we still treat and see them as people of dignity and worth.
I'd like to kind of add to that, you know, I guess because of what I've spent most of my life doing, especially as a young man, I had a certain attitude about the people that I dealt with that had come out of prison. You know, because you operate from a certain perspective. But I had a cousin that I grew up with that when he became a young adult, you know, where I went in a certain direction towards law enforcement, he went kind of the other direction. He ended up in federal prison on drug charges and stuff. And when he came out and watching, you know, his struggle, you know, what Jason talks about, you know, if you put yourself back in that environment, it's going to be difficult. And it took Sam some time to realize that, and he was able to I guess overcome some of that by moving off. He eventually had to move to a different location to kind of get away from that environment. But to watch the things that he had to go through to become successful really kind of changed my attitude, you know, about some of the things that I had always thought. You talk about the environment and the barriers that some of these people have to deal with. But fortunately, you know, it seems to me that a lot of that stuff is starting to turn around now.
Dr. Dye, I'll give you a quick example, maybe of something I encountered that made me, I don't know, it was one of my eye-opening moments. I'd been out of prison for about 3 years, been working for PEP, and I had just been offered the CEO position. I was looking for an apartment or a condominium in Dallas. And I showed up to several places wearing a suit, filled out the application fee, somewhere between 12 and 15 applications that I filled out. And everything was great until they did the background check. And it became, I started to wonder if I was going to be able to find housing as a CEO with, you know, you don't get rich working for nonprofit, but I could certainly pay for my housing bill. And it was just amazing to me. And finally, I met with a privately owned condominium guy, and he took me on a tour. And at the end, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Man, I love it." I said, "But here's going to be the rub. You know, I'm not going to be able to pass a background check." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I've got a felony on my record. It's almost 30 years old." He said, "Well, was it heinous or something?" I said, "Well, it's murder." And he goes, "So what? That was almost 30 years ago." He said, "Brian, if you can pay the monthly lease, you're in." And he said, "That, you know, that was 30 years ago. Who cares?" And I go, "You know what? Most people don't take that approach." And so there are so many policies that are rigidly written, baked against moving into successful housing post-release. We have positioned our folks back into low-income housing where drugs and crime are rampant. And we basically said, "Hey, that's where you belong." And so how do we expect them to ever rise up out of that if we won't invite them into a community where they can really survive and thrive?
Thanks, everybody, for sharing. I think that's really insightful, and it kind of, leads into another question I'm really interested in, which is, in your experience, personal or professional or both, what do you think is one of the biggest or most prevailing myths about formerly incarcerated individuals? Jason, you want to pop in first? Yeah.
Sure. I think that question is really dependent on every individual and their alone misconception. Because I think you can have a lot of people who feel like, well, this person's never going to change. Or on the other side of that is you can have individuals think that every person coming out has resolved already to change. And then you find yourself interacting with individuals. It's like everybody's in a different place. And there's individuals that have, maybe they're ready, but they haven't resolved to maybe make some differences. And so it's really understanding that people are in a process. And am I willing, when I encounter individuals and I walk with people or engaging them, if I find that are they in process? If they haven't resolved the change, am I still willing to help them to get to that place of where they can resolve and are ready to change? So I think it's still dependent on individuals. A lot of people feel like all people come out of prison are going to continue to go back and they just won't change. And some feel like every person that has went to prison is ready to change. So.
Dr. I would say another one is that, well, there's really two I can think of that, so many times when I go out and give a presentation, I can almost look at people glaze over and say, hey, this doesn't affect me. Why do I care whether or not a guy's getting out of prison or doing well? That doesn't touch me, but it touches all of us. 95% of the people who go to prison get back out. They're in our communities. They're pumping gas with us. They're going to church with us. They're going to Walmart with us. They are us. And we are them. And so I think we just need to recognize that we've got to give them a fighting second chance at life, or, it's in all of our best interests. And I think another one tied to that is, once a criminal, always a criminal, or they're incorrigible, they can't turn it around. That is simply not true. And I've got thousands of examples to prove that wrong.
I echo that, Brian. I was going to say, I think it's the people's capacity to change and that they can't be valuable assets to the workforce. And I'll keep my perspective kind of narrow to workforce development because that's what my area of expertise is. But I think, businesses thinking through, and I've seen them, think through how our hiring practices potentially hindered us. With the nature of our work really doesn't require us to exclude folks with certain misdemeanors or felonies. And so, how can we, look at them as being an asset to our workplace and really kind of seen really good examples of tying, employers with interventions like Brian, where it is more of that holistic support. It's not just about the skills training, it's about connection with community and providing that supportive piece. And so I think that it may take a little bit more creativity as far as the interventions go, but I think that doesn't mean that folks who are reentering our community don't have those abilities or the ability to learn and to be able to be, the assets that these businesses need for the types of jobs that they have.
Well, I would just add, kind of what Brian and Jason were talking about. I think, and this is more from a personal observation, sometimes these guys, when they're coming out, they face a lot of doubt from their families. Their families, I think sometimes, even before they get out, are saying, well, when they get back out, they're going to get right back into trouble again. That's the way they've always done stuff. And I think that's one of the barriers that a lot of these guys have to overcome is to win their families over first, because there is that belief, that they're just going to mess up again. And for some people, if they don't have that support from the family, it's just going to push them in that direction.
Thank you all. A brief reminder to our participants that if you have any questions, if you could submit them via the Q&A feature, that's the mode to get them to us. So we welcome those questions. So this next question, I guess, is kind of two parts, and so we'll kind of take our time with it. But in your experience, again, personal, professional, or both, what factors do you see or see as kind of playing the biggest role in recidivism and recidivating? And on the flip side, what factors do you see that lead best to post-carceral flourishing, right? So the two sides, what are the factors that lead to the most recidivism? And then on the other side, what factors do you see that are so critical to kind of that reentry point, moving into a kind of flourishing life without recidivism? So Brian, do you want to start us off here, and then we'll move through?
Absolutely. I know, and you mentioned earlier, Dr. Dye, that there are 44,000 barriers to reentry. That's overwhelming. And a lot of those are occupational licensing and some things like that. But, there are so many barriers in housing, transportation, banking, relationships, and just, socially, community. It is overwhelming. And I think so many people get out of prison with great hope, with a desire to go contribute to the community, and they get nothing but pummeled by all of the restrictions that they run into, and finally just land back in the spot where I guess I'm just going to go back to selling dope or doing something else. There's nothing else. I'm tired of trying to fight this battle and climb this hill. And so it gets overwhelming, and they end up in addiction. All right. But I think it's always because of those barriers. And to reentry, we've got to open those doors. We've got to empower our people and give them a legitimate chance to be real contributors to society. If it costs us $30,000 a year to incarcerate somebody, rough estimates, if we keep them out and they're earning only $30,000 on the outside, it's a $60,000 swing on our tax base. It makes sense for us to help them get out and succeed and live a productive life.
I think there's those 40,000 barriers. I think just in my professional experience, the piece of, I've seen workforce type programs that do job skills training and may some soft skill, wrap some soft skills in there, but they're not necessarily tied to employers who are willing to hire those folks when they're finished, or provide those the accessible credentials, because there are industry-based credentials out there that are open to folks to be able to obtain. Now, getting the funding for that's another thing, because that can be another barrier that we've had to get creative with being able to provide tuition assistance for folks that may not qualify for traditional student aid. But I've seen that contributing to, all the other barriers is then when they go through these interventions that I think aren't designed well, or have utilized people who have that lived experience or who work specifically with those populations. Whereas on the flip side, and I have heard of Brian's program before. So I've been in this space for about a decade, and it seems like the trend is, I know I sound like a broken record, but either on the entrepreneurial side, that being a viable, worthy career path. And then if they go towards, working for an employer, it's making sure that you understand what types of credentials and opportunities are available, what employers are willing to work with higher ed partners or training providers to provide those skills training, and being open to these folks when they finish. But in addition to that, what Jason and Brian have both talked on is then incorporating whether it's the mentoring piece, the support, the connection piece, the character piece, that's shown to be more than just a week-long soft skills training program, but those interventions that lend themselves to behavior change, I see those being more effective in helping with the recidivism rate. And even on a policy level too, is just looking at, what are those restrictions at the licensing level? And is there a way, particularly for folks who are passionate about this, is there room to advocate for changes in some of these restrictions? Because sometimes they are kind of blanket where you're kind of, it could be 30, your charge or conviction could be 30, 40 years old. And you could have never reoffended and you're still going to be precluded from a certain type of occupational license. So I think it's doing that type of work and learning what we need to advocate for on the industry side, because there are these population of folks who would be willing and ready, and getting them skilled and trained, and not just for jobs that pay $9 an hour. So I love Brian's metrics. That's what we really work on the initiative that we work here locally on upskilling and reskilling folks for high demand jobs, is that it's not enough just to get them into an $8, $9, $10 an hour job. We really want those career paths, those job paths that lend themselves to a living wage. And that's important to track long term.
No, from my perspective, you talk about what causes people to get back into crime. A lot of times it is what we've talked about already a lot, and that is they go back to what they were comfortable with. They go back to the same people. They go back to the same neighborhood, and almost immediately when they go back into that kind of environment, you see them starting to slip, and I just I understand the barriers that everyone's talking about, but I think from my perspective, it really starts there. They've got to separate themselves, maybe not physically, but they've got to separate themselves from what they're used to when they were out before. They start running with the same guys and running in those social circles. It's just really difficult for people to be in that environment and not slip back into what they were used to. It's just, to me, that's one of the biggest things. They've got to make that change, and they've got to get that support, whether it's their family, or if it's some type of religious organization, or if it's something like Brian's program. There's got to be something to give them that support.
Yeah, very similar on, I've got my printout of the questions here, and on this question number 3, I wrote relationships. One of the reasons that people do go back is because of the network of relationships that they surround themselves with. It doesn't mean that you shift the blame that it's somebody else's fault, but it's an individual desire for a relationship, to walk with people, to live life with people, that will go right back to that unhealthy relationship, even if it's unhealthy, but just the desire to be in some form of relationship, whether it's friends, family, or a relationship, exclusive relationship. Just because of that that need that individuals have, they're willing to take that risk and then find themselves engulfed back into everything that they were pulled out of for a period of time when they were incarcerated, and maybe sat while they were locked up, whether it was a year or 2 years, thinking, I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to go back. Or, man, or I can't wait to get back, and they get back in those relationships. Same thing on the flip side is healthy relationships. I've gotten the opportunity to walk with a lot of people, and people I've seen, that joined a church and started to follow Jesus and gave their lives and started to live life with purpose, and having others around them that were supportive to say, yes, your life means something, you have a purpose, and then help to sharpen individuals and help provide for. I've seen those people thrive. I've seen people start businesses. I've seen people become dads again, become husbands, and good neighbors and volunteers in the community. I've seen guys who had a lot of resources when they come home and get a lot of resources, but because of they still had a job, they had everything they needed, but because they went back to certain relationships that weren't healthy, it took them back down the road. And so I believe that I wrote on that one, flourishing and well-being. I wrote the church. People getting a part of a church and joining and living life with individuals that are going to really live life with them and really have accountability that goes beyond just maybe a once in a while kind of check-in, but more of a life on life. So.
So I really, this is all very, very, I think, interesting and thought provoking, and something that I've been thinking a lot about is, the title of this series, envisioning equity, right? And thinking about equity and increasing equity. And part of it is that we know, we talk a lot here at BCHIP about the fact that a lot of times we think that social issues are, or the people that are facing certain injustices or inequities, they're kind of isolated. Like there are people who don't have access to healthcare, and there are people who are caught up in the carceral system, and there are people who are, but that in realities, usually those are overlapping. And right, it's the same people who are, who are racial or ethnic minorities, who disproportionately live in low income communities, who disproportionately have lack of access to transportation or healthcare. And then those things intersect with higher incarceration rates, right? That all of this is this kind of tangled web. And I think for one thing that we talk a lot about is that because it is largely the same people who are in experiencing the web of kind of manifestations and then further causes, that cyclical relationship of poverty related and inequities, poverty related issues, and then inequities writ large. One of the things that means is that solutions are complicated and have to cover a wide variety of aspects and issues, and they require multiple sectors, and they're interdisciplinary. They require collaboration because the issues are also overlapping and large, and there's elements of individual responsibility, but there are also these huge systemic and policy related factors. And because of that, we think about solutions in terms of or approaches to solutions to equity. When we envision equity, we think about that. I think in this panel is a really good example of that, as something that's interdisciplinary and multi-sector and collaborative. And so I think from your vantage point, your particular vantage points, what I would really love us to spend a few minutes thinking about is, what can Wacoans, so everyone but Brian is here in Waco, and Waco, and Brian, you can just kind of, I don't know, you can tell Wacoans what to do here.
I'm coming to Waco tomorrow. Does that count?
That counts. You're here enough. We've sat down at enough Waco restaurants together that I think you can speak to the Waco community. But what can Wacoans do, given the kind of breadth and depth of the inequities and the ways in which what can the people that are watching this do, or what can the participants do to help formerly incarcerated people in our community? From your vantage point, what are some of those things that people could go do, today, tomorrow, next month, in the year to come, actionable things? Tiffany, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I figured I'd get picked on since I'm the one that works at a collective impact organization. But that is what, we eat, sleep, and breathe that here is, the whole premise under collective impact is that not one organization or individual could solve these complex systemic issues that our communities face. And so we eat, sleep, and breathe collaboration and ways that we can help either support existing partners in these spaces or help promote new efforts across health, financial security, and education. So as you can see, even our focus area, our 3 buckets of work is pretty broad, but they're all interconnected. I think from an individual perspective or from a community level perspective, I think there are organizations, and obviously Jason is a big asset to our community through Antioch Church and just the work that they do with folks. And we do have other local organizations like Christian Men's Job Corps, Christian Women's Job Corps, and I know Jason as well, that take volunteers. And so I think for folks that are interested in the more individual relationship building aspect, Mission Waco is another one. Those are organizations that do interface with these folks, that provide volunteer opportunities for our community members to walk alongside or partner with these programs. I think more at a macro level, I know our organization, we've got a working group, which Jason was one of the original members of, our Waco Employer Resource Network group. And that's a collective of job training organizations, nonprofits, and businesses, higher ed. And we kind of focus on unemployed, underemployed as a whole, but obviously within that fits justice involved individuals. And most of the organizations in there have high numbers of folks that they work with that fit into that category. And so I think if you're interested in learning kind of what collaborative efforts are going on in this space, there's always ways that I think we need to improve and do better. I'm always happy to be a point contact as far as, kind of a community-wide networking piece. But I think, individual level, getting engaged with those that are doing the work on the ground. And then I think at that more macro level, community level, is bringing together the sectors of folks, the justice system, the nonprofits, folks that offer, holistic programming like PEP, together to really look at, how can we scale this to our particular community? Because I do think we can do a better job of serving folks who are formerly incarcerated in McLennan County. And I think we're kind of getting more there with more reskilling and upskilling. I've seen the trend over time where we're now focused more on jobs that actually pay living wages instead of just let's give people jobs. But I think we really need to lean on those who have, the expertise in designing interventions that are effective, and as well as those with lived experience too. Bringing those voices in to help us design these solutions that would fit for our particular community.
A couple of things I had listed, some different terminology too, kind of avoid post-institutionalism. Sometimes people who go to prison, they'll get institutionalized, where it's like, I've gotten so used to prison, but then outside we can help individuals get so used to being like just released and like, are you going to make it, not going to make it, are you going to make it, not going to make it kind of mindset, versus like, hey, we can help individuals, like, you're out, you're going to make it, and you're going through a process. That means you might have a little fail here, but it's a process that is part of the journey. And so really helping people see that it's a process. You're not going to get out, you're not going to have everything that you dreamed of right away. It's going to take a while. And kind of like Brian's data that was given, that you noticed that at the 3-year mark, people were becoming homeowners and they were making a livable wage. Helping individuals see that, and seeing that you're committed to the process with them. So that goes a long way. They have handrails, but then there's people to walk alongside of them to that. So I had to help them integrate through healthy relationships again, and help people discover the power of resiliency, and to have vision for the process. And like when you get out and you're like, man, you've got high hopes, and when it doesn't happen and you face that disappointment or that little roadblock, it's like, it's okay. This is part of the journey. This is part of the process that we're going to get through. And all of those are what's helping shape you, prepare you. There's a scripture that says, he who's faithful in the little will be faithful and rule over much. And it's like helping people be faithful in the little they do have and continue to grow and grow and grow. And that way, when they do have much, they're able to manage it, they're able to carry it without the burden of too much. And then that leads to some going back to certain things. That's I think that's what we can do as Wacoans. And I think it's important too that kind of like what Brian said, we're seeing people at the gas station or HEB, or these are our people, they are our people. And so there is a huge city that here in Waco that they have somebody connected to them. It's a cousin, a brother, a mother, somebody that is going through this experience right here. And so for a lot of the people that have moved to Waco and are part of this community now, to know that there are many people that have been here a long time, that's just kind of a lot of people have been experiencing that for generations. It's like, how can I build a relationship with them right where they're at, whether that's, coming from way over here to way over here and connecting, but committed to the life and to the journey together. So.
Sarah, there's two things I think. One's specific and one's more general. And specific is, employment. If we can give them a job and recognize that there is an untapped, untrained, and largely unprepared labor pool coming out of our prisons that a lot of employers are looking for right now, but I think it takes a little bit of extra training and a little bit of extra engagement in that, we need to help them make sure that their back life, not just the work life, but the back life is taken care of too. What's the banking look like? What's the relationships look like? Housing and those things. And because we don't want the back life to erode, or the employment's going to erode as well. And so some of our most engaged employers have helped with that. We've put together mentorship programs and peer groups where they could talk about those things and help iron out the wrinkles that start to form kind of in the background to make sure that doesn't happen. And when they do, they're so appreciative, so loyal to an employer that gives them a livable wage type job that they will stick with them forever and produce. And so I think everybody's happy. And then the higher level, and it's just engagement. It's just making sure we're welcoming, we're engaging, we're touching in with people coming out of prison. When we hear about that, we're asking questions, we're getting, as we say in here, getting in their business. When I got out after 22 years in prison, I was walking to church my very first week, and a car stopped on the road and asked me if I was going to church. And I said, yeah. And they said, get in, I'll give you a ride. And as we were talking, before they even knew I was an ex-felon, they said, hey, we'll give you a ride. We'll stop by every week. We want to help you out. We love what God's doing in your life. And I said, hold on, you need to know. I just got out of prison. And they were like, so what? We've done plenty of things we could have went to prison for. I love what God's doing in your life. I want to help you. And it made me feel welcome. It gave me confidence that, hey, I'm not going to be rejected here. There's some grace that's going on. So the more we can engage, the more we can employ, the more we can get in that business, the better we're going to help them to succeed.
I just want to make one comment on that. Exactly. One employer that I've seen who's done a great job with that is Rick Tullis over at Capstone Mechanical over the years. He's hired individuals who's been on the journey and really just engage them in the workplace. And you could see the shift in an individual's mind when the employer engages in, believes in them, and creates opportunity for them. It does something amazing in individuals.
I am so grateful, Tiffany and Brian and Jason and Assistant Chief Norcross. I'm so grateful for your time and your expertise and your thoughts and just for sharing so openly. I wish we had time for more questions, but we are a little bit over time. So we will end now, but I think that, as Tiffany said, she would be happy for people to reach out and talk to her. And I think that most of us feel that way. You can Google any one of us, I'm sure, and find our email addresses or phone numbers, or reach out and ask us questions. And we would love to stay engaged in this conversation and see Waco become a place that is this very supportive community for formerly incarcerated folks, their friends, their families, their loved ones. It's so many people in our community. And if we are going to envision equity, I hope we also then, after we've envisioned it, we start taking those steps towards it to make that vision a reality, to make that vision a lived experience. So thank you all so much for your time today. I'm going to introduce everybody to Cuevas Peacock from External Affairs at Baylor, and he is going to give us a couple of announcements and closing thoughts. And we're so grateful to all of you participants for your time today.
Yes, again, thank you all, Dr. Dodd and our esteemed panelists, for just being willing to go on the journey with us and share their expertise in about a subject and a topic that impacts us all. Here at Baylor, our hope is to envision equity, and we hope to do that through this ongoing conversation series. And so throughout this past year, we have talked about inequities in health, education, financial security, and now criminal justice. Sadly, this is our last event for the year, with the hope to kick it back off again next year, hopefully in person. And so, but just again, we just want to make sure that we are saying thank you to all the audience members who were able to attend, to participate and engage around this conversation. As a reminder, I just want to make sure that everyone is following us and keeping up to date with the work of our office. on Facebook and Instagram by liking and following us at Solid Gold Neighbor, which is shared right now in front of you all. And then it's a way to kind of stay up to date on future Envision Equity events, as well as the other calendar of things that we're doing within the Office of External Affairs here at Baylor. And then lastly, for our Baylor community, I just want to make sure that you're reminded to take part in our Go Gold discounts. This is a way for the university to directly engage with Waco as a whole by supporting our local businesses and making sure that we are being good stewards of the resources and the products and other people who are making our community thrive. Thank you all again for just being willing to take the time out to hear about this program and to hear from people who are engaged in this work, as our hope is to help figure out actionable steps to lessen our recidivism within our Waco community. Have a great afternoon, everyone.